For the past 2 weeks, Israel has been turning the entire geopolitical chessboard in the Middle East upside down. It has beheaded Hezbollah, is intensively bombing this guerrilla group's positions in Lebanon and Syria, and has even begun a partial invasion of southern Syria. In other words, Benjamin Netanyahu is going all out. We've already told you all about what's going on in the last 2 VisualPolitik videos. It stands to reason that attacking and dismantling Hezbollah not only puts this militia on the ropes, it's also a direct attack on the shadow power of the Ayatollah's regime. They have now responded.
Iran launches about 180 ballistic missiles at Israel. Many of the missiles were intercepted with the help of the United States, but some fell in central and southern Israel.
This is the second direct missile strike Iran has carried out against Israel in just a few months. In this case, according to the chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran, General Mohammad Bagheri, the missiles were directed against 4 military targets, 3 military bases and the headquarters of the Mossad, the well-known Israeli intelligence service. However, this is only hot air, because just like what happened last April, the attack has hardly caused any damage. Most of the missiles have been intercepted by anti-aircraft defenses, and others have fallen in unpopulated areas. And yes, okay, it's true that some missiles have also caused a little minor damage to some buildings, but there have been no human fatalities. The only victim seems to be a Palestinian who was hit by a fragment of these missiles. In other words, everything suggests that we're once again facing an internal propaganda action on the part of the Ayatollahs rather than a real attack. The only thing Iran has achieved is to test Israeli defenses once again, in this case with some of its most modern missiles, which is no small feat. This was the case with the Fatah missiles, a type of missile that can fly at very high speeds and which Iran had not used until now. And of course, make no mistake, we on VisualPolitik condemn this attack. Yet, as we will see in this very video, if Iran had really intended to harm Israel, the attack would have been executed very differently. Even so, the truth is that both within Israel and the United States, there has been an outcry.
We must act now to destroy its nuclear project, destroy their major energy facilities, and critically hit this terrorist regime. It is not enough to intercept missiles and drones moments before they reach civilians in Israel or US personnel in the Red Sea. It is time to replenish Israel's supply of critical munitions. It is time for the world's leading architects of terror and their proxies to face severe consequences.
Be that as it may, the most important thing is that this was not the only bad news of the night for Israel. The worst was this event.
At least 6 killed and several injured in Tel Aviv shooting.
2 Palestinian terrorists opened fire with large weapons in the middle of Tel Aviv, killing 6 people and wounding 12 others. Coincidence? Orchestrated move? We don't know. But what we do know is that this is probably the most disturbing thing we have seen. Let's just say that it gives us a warning of which direction the response of Hamas, Hezbollah, and even Iran to the ultra-strong Israeli campaign of the last few weeks may now take. In any case, Israel has promised revenge, and the question is, how far will this revenge go? Are we now really facing the full scale of the crisis in the Middle East? And the most important question under the circumstances, in what manner and with what capacity does Iran actually have to attack Israel? Well, VisualPolitik community, that's exactly what we're going to look at in this video.
Iran's regime does not understand our determination to defend ourselves and our determination to retaliate against our enemies.
But first, let me tell you something. Did you know that around 40% of the people who watch VisualPolitik are not yet subscribed to the channel? Well, that has an easy solution. In 1 second, you can join the channel and be made aware of all our videos. All you have to do is click on the subscribe button, then on that little bell, and that's it. You instantly become part of this great community. And now, yes, let's get back to everything that's happening in the Middle East.
The eternal enemy.
When we talk about Iran, we have to imagine a kind of octopus with all its tentacles, which is exactly how former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has described it recently. The tentacles, or at least the most important ones, are Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. These groups are the ones that, up until now, have been doing almost all the dirty work for the Ayatollahs. Logically, they form the head of this particular octopus. Well, now think about what an octopus would be without its tentacles. It would have a hard time accomplishing its goals, wouldn't it? Because that's exactly what Israel has been taking care of in recent weeks and months. The fatal blow to Hezbollah and the invasion in southern Lebanon that is now underway has sent Iran's entire regional strategy of recent decades to the dogs. Their tentacles are practically paralyzed, and the only one that still retains some strength has lost half of its arsenal and its entire command structure.
Israel has destroyed half of Hezbollah's arsenal, US and Israeli officials say.
Of course, this is not to say that Iran's offensive capability or the threat it poses has disappeared, not at all. Iran could always get involved to escalate the conflict. As we've told you previously on VisualPolitik, the fact that the Ayatollahs don't do it is because Israel has everything to gain in a direct confrontation, basically because the Iranian force is concentrated on its missiles. The problem for them is that in order for these missiles to work, they need to make large saturation strikes that are capable of overcoming Israeli air defenses, which gives them a very narrow window of opportunity. 1, 2, or maybe at most 3 rounds with destructive capability, but that's as far as it goes. Logically, these attacks could cause a lot of damage in Israel, but then all the limelight would fall on Israel, which would have much more capacity to punish Iran unceremoniously. And keep in mind, this is not a fantasy or a hypothesis that we've just pulled out of a hat. It's a scenario that Tehran understands perfectly well. And so this is, in fact, why Iran has made a great effort in recent years to develop drone manufacturing that can complement its missiles, and thus expand that window of opportunity. Not surprisingly, it's also what explains the Ayatollah's determination to develop the nuclear bomb. They know that this is the best guarantee of the regime's survival. But let's take a closer look at the offensive capabilities that the Persian power really has. To do so, let's answer this question. What would an open war between Iran and Israel look like, at least in the initial phase? Well, first of all, keep one thing in mind. Iran has at least 20 different types of missiles in its arsenal. We find ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, anti-ship missiles, and anti-aircraft missiles, among other options. This is the basis of the Ayatollah's defense. And so, Iranian military doctrine is designed for a very specific type of war, should Jerusalem and Tehran come into conflict. As we've said, we're talking about ballistic warfare, a type of warfare that not only has an enormous destructive potential, but above all, has a very important deterrent component. Because despite the fact that Israel has one of the best anti-missile defenses in the world, if not the best, Iran knows full well what its limitations are. As I said before, it's perfectly possible to saturate every layer of the Israeli anti-aircraft defense if you launch a huge number of missiles in a very short period of time. Well, according to US estimates, Iran has more than 3,000 ballistic missiles, with which it would be perfectly capable of carrying out a hail of fire that would be very difficult to stop. However, this type of war is all or nothing. 3,000 ballistic missiles are a lot, but they aren't enough to win the war against an army with the offensive capabilities that Israel has. Precision missiles, submarines, one of the best air forces, and even, let's not forget, nuclear bombs. Therefore, the key to Iranian deterrence of Israel is essentially based on a single premise: maximizing the price that Israel would have to pay if there were a direct clash between the two countries. Have you ever wondered what a massive attack by the Ayatollahs against Israel might look like? Not one like last night, but a real one. One that really seeks to punish its opponent. Well, it would be like this. It would be organized in several phases. First, as I've just told you, massive initial attacks would be carried out with the aim of saturating Israel's defenses: the Iron Dome, the David Sling, and the Arrow system. Iran could use several hundred of the least sophisticated missiles in its medium-range arsenal. It would target Israeli military bases, airports, operations centers, and critical infrastructure such as power plants, fuel depots, and communications centers. Then, once the initial chaos was generated, Iran would move on to the second phase, attacking the most crucial military infrastructure. This would include attacks on Israel's nuclear facilities, such as, for example, the Dimona Nuclear Research Center in the Negev Desert. And finally, in a third wave of strikes, Iran could use its longer range and more accurate cruise missiles, such as the Suma or the Hovizeh, for more targeted attacks. We're talking about missiles that are more difficult to intercept due to low flight profile and their ability to change trajectory in mid-flight. They would be the perfect weapon to use at a time when Israel was already dealing with the situation of saturation of its air defenses and damage caused by critical infrastructure being hit. Also, don't forget one thing: Iran's missile launch systems have an enormous ability to switch from one location to another quickly. This allows them to fire from various locations and makes it difficult for Israel to destroy the launchers. And not only that, Iran could disperse its launchers over almost all of its huge territory, and even in allied countries such as Syria or some areas of Iraq controlled by its militia groups. In this way, missiles would reach Israel from several different directions, making the challenge of countering the attack more difficult. But of course, once at this point, the question we would all be asking is, and then what? Let's say Iran exhausts most of its ballistic arsenal and Israel suffers severe impacts, but logically its military capabilities withstand the attacks more or less successfully. That would lead to a scenario of response, of conventional war counterattack by Israel, and perhaps also by the United States. And this, VisualPolitik community, is when everything changes radically. The next stages of the war would leave Iran exposed to one blow after another. From the initial whiplash of their missiles, there would be very little they could do. Israel would gradually be able to bomb all kinds of targets inside Iran. At first, Iranian air defenses would probably work, but they would gradually be consumed under enemy fire. VisualPolitik community, as I said earlier, this is not speculation. It's something that Tehran knows perfectly well. For them, missiles are a way to deter an attack, but not to win a war. For precisely this reason, the Ayatollahs have been clear for many years that their strength lies above all in asymmetric warfare. That is to say, in avoiding direct clashes, and to finance, encourage, and train militia groups to attack their enemies, which is basically what the Revolutionary Guards have been developing for decades in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and lately also in Palestine. But when it comes to conventional capabilities, in other words, modern artillery and tanks, advanced combat aircraft, deployment capabilities, fleet, and so on, that's another world. In fact, contrary to what has happened in other such regimes, Tehran has never had any real intention of building a truly large conventional armed forces prepared for open and direct warfare. Look, for example, at this graph. Iranian military spending has historically been low, considering its level of belligerence towards Israel, the United States, and other players in the region. The asymmetric warfare that Israel has been dealing with is an extremely cheap war for Iran, so why on earth would they spend more on something in which they are never really going to be able to get the upper hand? Now, we wouldn't be telling you the whole story if we just stopped here, because logically, this doesn't mean that Iran is totally disarmed. As you can see, Tehran has many more active military and artillery launchers, but that's as far as it goes, because we're talking about quantity, but if we're talking about quality, this whole scheme quickly falls apart. Not to mention the Air Force, which in a war with Israel would be the essential element, because this would basically be a war fought in the skies. Well, to give you an example, the Iranian Air Force relies mainly on Russian Sukhois 24 and MiG-29 technology from the 1970s. And yes, it also has some American fighters from the time of the Shah of Persia, but need I say more? Meanwhile, Israel, for its part, has more than 200 modern fighters, including the latest F-35s. And this is just to give you one illustration, because I think there's no debate here. Israel is one of the best and most advanced armies in the world. But of course, in this case, the key is who would resist better, or who would be more daring in a war of ballistic attrition. And in this sense, both sides have a lot to lose. And that's precisely why a full-scale war is a scenario that the two countries both seek to avoid. And although it may sound strange to say it with what is happening now, this is how things stand. Of course, we're not done yet. Okay, as we've said, Iran's power towards Israel is basically in deterrence. But that's not the only formula the Ayatollahs have for threatening Israel. In fact, they have two other major possible moves, which are also a serious risk for the Jewish state. First, as we've already mentioned in passing, there is asymmetric warfare. If Israel were to attack Iran, Iran could defend itself by mobilizing its militia groups to carry out terrorist attacks, for instance. It wouldn't even take a major attack. It would be enough to mobilize several lone wolves. And don't forget the Iranians move very well in the shadows. As we've already said, this has been the great obsession of the Revolutionary Guard for decades. And it's certainly a hard thing to stop, because yes, you can take out the leader and commanders of Hezbollah, but logically you aren't going to take out all its militants. So Iran would have the ability to mobilize troops to prepare asymmetric attacks on Israeli soil. That would be a huge problem. But all in all, the second move is perhaps the most important in this entire story, and it has been for decades. VisualPolitik community. The most important deterrent power Iran has towards Israel is fundamentally an indirect power. Do you remember the huge number of missiles the Ayatollahs have? These could be launched against Israel en masse to saturate its air defenses and cause great damage, as we've already outlined. But they could also use them to attack other very distinct targets. I'm talking about refineries and oil and gas fields in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, United Arab Emirates, Qatar. Basically, the entire energy heartland of the Middle East is within range of Iran's armed missiles and drones. And that's not all. Along with drones and missiles, the Iranians also have a lot of boats, many of them autonomous. Well, with these boats and drones, they could block the Strait of Hormuz by attacking ships in their path. Evidently, these two actions combined would cause a huge economic and political earthquake worldwide, which is not in Israel's interest. But more importantly, it's not in the interest of Israel's major allies. This has indeed been Iran's great deterrent capability over recent decades. Of course, such an action would be suicidal for the Ayatollah's regime. Arab countries would fight back, and international intervention would probably follow. But the damage could be enormous. Well, this, and no other, is the way Iran could tell Israel, watch what you do. This is the danger of the Ayatollahs. Do they have the upper hand? Evidently not. That's why for years the United States has been building up not only anti-aircraft defenses in the region, but also military capabilities strong enough to disrupt a large part of Tehran's possible reaction. But the risk is on the table, and that's why nobody wants an open war in principle. In fact, for years, Israel has been betting on Mossad and not on the IDF to confront the Iranian threat, and this time is likely to be no different. Will we see an Israeli response to the Iranian missile attack similar to the one we saw a few months ago? Well, probably yes, but that's as far as it goes. Most likely it will be a very limited response, just as the Iranian attack itself was. Of course, the biggest blow Israel has already dealt Iran is with its brutal dismantling of Hezbollah. Don't you agree? In fact, shortly after the missile attack, this happened. The IDF announced that in immediate response, they would attack more targets of Iran's allies in Lebanon and Syria, and that's exactly what they did. Naturally, VisualPolitik community, this in itself also has another result. It means that Israel may be considering taking advantage of the occasion to try some bigger target, such as attacking some of the facilities of Iran's nuclear program. How would Iran respond? It could hardly do so now with Hezbollah, so it would have to decide whether to shoot itself in the foot or let the affront pass for now. It would be risky, but also smart on Israel's part, don't you think? Although it's most likely that for now, it will come to almost nothing. But whatever the case, all will soon play out. Now we've reached the point where the questions are for all of you. How far do you think the confrontation between Israel and Iran could go? Are we looking at a possible regional war? Or will we continue to see measured attacks for a period until the war against Hamas and Hezbollah subsides? Well, leave us your opinions below in the comments and let's start a debate. And very important, if you like this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already done so that you don't miss any news. As always, thank you very much for watching, take care, and we'll see you next time.